In this podcast, we're going to learn how to calculate the molecular mass and the formula mass for formulas. And remember that molecular mass and formula mass are really the same thing. If it is covalent, we call it the molecular mass, and if it's ionic, we call it the formula mass. There's three different types of formulas that we're going to talk about. The first one is the molecular formula, which tells what atoms are present and what ratios. The next is the empirical formula, which tells us the simplest ratio of atoms. And this is usually the one that we use because remember that ionic compounds are always going to be the empirical formula. So for H2O2, because this is all the atoms present, the simplest ratio is HO, and that's the empirical formula. The structural formula shows how all the atoms are connected together. So hydrogen is connected to oxygen, then another oxygen, then the final hydrogen. When we talk about geometry later on and covalent bonding in more detail, we'll talk more about structure. So to calculate the molecular mass or formula mass, you add up all the atomic masses of all the atoms in a formula. That's it. So for water has the formula H2O, which has 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. We're going to add up the atomic masses. Remember that the atomic mass is the number on the periodic table, the decimal number on the periodic table that is under the symbol, and that is the average of all the masses for those isotopes of that element. So hydrogen is 1.01 and oxygen is 16.00. Because there are 2 hydrogens in our formula, we have to multiply hydrogen by 2, just 1.01 times 2. And there's only 1 oxygen. And then we add them all together and get 18.02. The units are atomic mass units. So for nitrogen trichloride, the first thing from the name is we have to write the formula to know that there is 1 nitrogen and 3 chlorines. Nitrogen is 14.01, chlorine is 35.45, but there are 3 chlorines. So we have to multiply this by 3. Add everything together and you get 120.37. Sodium chloride is ionic, so we call its mass, we call it the formula mass, and because it's an empirical formula. So 1 sodium, 1 chloride, find their atomic masses, add them together, 58.44. If there's a polyatomic ion, everything that's inside the parentheses gets multiplied by the subscript. In this case, there's 2 oxygens and 2 hydrogens because of this 2 here. So magnesium hydroxide has 1 magnesium, 24.31, 2 oxygens, 16 times 2, 2 hydrogens, 1.01 times 2. Add them all together, squeeze this in here, you get 58.33. So for the next section, practice, write out the formula from the name, and then from the formula, calculate the mass and write it here. Stop the video and go through and do this, and then turn it back on and check your work. So a couple things to note here. Aluminum nitrate is Al and then 3 nitrate groups. So the NO3 is the polyatomic, and then parentheses followed by the 3. So there are actually 9 oxygens in aluminum nitrate. And cobalt-3 sulfate, again, has 3 sulfate groups, and because each sulfate group has 4 oxygens, there's going to be a total of 12 oxygens in cobalt-2 sulfate.